See this guy? He goes by HeyJ. He's a YouTuber who took on Fatalis and shared his thoughts about the experience in his journal. Here's what he had to say.
You know, here we are in a game where it's you versus nature. With Fatalis, the fact that these are like man-made weaponry that you're using against it, that took something away from me. I didn't like the fact that there were cannons and all this weaponry to use on Fatalis.
So after seeing that video, I had an idea. I'll take on every siege monster without ever using the artillery and see whether it's possible to beat each one. No ballistas, cannons, dragonators, or even demolishers. The first fight was with a monster I'm sure many of you never heard of, Shen Gaoren in Freedom Unite. The big issue with this quest is it's 30 minutes and I either have to slay or repel this colossal crustacean. Shen also takes 5 minutes to arrive in the battlefield. Talk about taking your sweet time, especially with the 30-minute timer. When this thing walks, it causes tremors, so I brought armor that negates that and I focused my attacks on the legs since they turn red the more you attack them. And I placed bombs when he was down only to forget that bombs deal a lot of damage to the player in older games. Not to mention, he trampled me a bunch. It was 5 minutes left in the fight, which was starting to concern me, but despite all odds, I beat it without even touching the artillery. I was pretty happy with this victory, but this is only the first of many siege fights. Like Sadis, which I thought would be straightforward for the most part, just attacking the thing without using the ballista or dragonator, right? Well, yes. Until you realize there's a time limit and you have to attack it on the move in the first phase, then try to finish it in the last phase. The problem I ran into was having to chase it down when it decided to wander around the arena, which normally would have been a good time to use the ballista. But since I couldn't use that, I had to follow the thing around. But of course, once I broke the horns and dealt enough damage, I repelled the Sadist. For Jhen Mohran, I was gonna do the G rank one, but I only had access to the event one, so I chose that. This fight mostly involved waiting for it to get close so I could hit it and then get on its back to attack the weak points. That, and I had to let it attack the ship since I couldn't use the Dragonator or Gong. During the final phase, I was trying to deal enough damage to where I can repel it, but despite my best efforts, I just couldn't beat it. I guess this one is not possible. Alright, for this next one, I know HeyJ is probably watching this video, and in case you are and haven't gotten that far in 3U, this is spoiler territory, so I would suggest coming back later or skipping to this timestamp. I'm not kidding. I want to see your reaction to this monster once you see it. Go! Assuming HeyJ actually skips this next part, Miralis is our next target, and there is a Dragonator as well as a ballista on the field that I have to avoid. The fight itself was decently challenging, especially since I had armor with negative 30 fire resistance. You know, the more I fight Dire, the more I want it to return in future games. Anyway, the fight wasn't that bad without using the artillery. Felt almost normal, but I wouldn't say it was easy. Now, in regards to Jhen Mohran, you'd think I'd have trouble with it the same way I had trouble with Jhen Mohran, right? Well, I wiped the floor with him. He didn't even damage the boat much at all. This was also in G rank, might I add. Now for this next fight, I was nervous considering my past experiences with this monster, Gogmazios. This fight has always been a tough one for me, challenge or not, and taking it on without using any artillery would make it the toughest fight yet. But I do have a charge blade set that I made thanks to the help of Quantized Anson. This set would allow me to keep the assault without getting stuck in tar for this challenge. So right off the bat, I was getting good in the fight so far and got consistent damage off when I could. I would also go for mounts when the opportunity came, but I had to be careful not to trigger the restraints since it can be easy to do on accident. I got it to the second phase fairly early, which was a good sign since in the other challenges, it would take longer to do so. But it was starting to get more tense and I was getting concerned. I even fainted at some point, but I was able to break off the Dragonator from the back, but had to be careful not to use it on accident. It was getting down to the 10-minute mark and I was getting stressed, but then I somehow beat it. Finally! It's possible to beat Gogmazios without using the artillery. Woo! But we're not done yet. We still have more siege fights to go. The Carcos was pretty standard until I lost. But that isn't because I wasn't using the only 2 ballistas in the fight. It's because I was rusty and forgot about the patterns of this monster. In fact, other people have beaten it without ballistas, so moving on. Atalka was also standard as well since most people beat it without the artillery anyway. Lao-Shan Lung on the other hand, I was sure would not be possible since he would attack the walls a bunch without being held down by binders or flinched by cannon fire. So I attacked him as much as I could on his way to the wall in the first phase. I was certain I wouldn't make it to the second phase since his health has a DPS check and he would destroy the wall before we would even get there. But to my pleasant surprise, he was moving to the second phase. I'm saying there's a chance. Then of course I was attacking his back and dealing damage underneath me for a while. I was getting concerned as it was 5 minutes left of the fight and the wall's integrity was getting low. I kept attacking Lao desperately until I beat it. Not just that, but I managed to slay it without even using the artillery. I couldn't believe it. It's actually possible. Next was Amatsu, which would have been a standard fight since there are only 2 ballistas, which most people hardly use, but oh my gosh, was this fight stressful. I was getting my butt handed to me in the first 5 minutes of the fight. Then the fight dragged on much longer than I was expecting, and I even ran out of healing items, which ended in my demise despite having feline insurance. This fight is definitely possible without the ballistas, but I just couldn't beat it in the end. Oh no, not White Fatalis. Ugh, let's just get it over with. After having a tough loss from Amatsu, I wasn't expecting much from this fight at all, but surprisingly, I was doing much better than I thought. I didn't die at all in the fight, but sadly, time ran out and I failed. This fight might be possible without the artillery, but like with Amatsu, I just couldn't beat the White Dragon, let alone repel it. The next siege fight was with Zorah Magdaros. Other than being the famous boring fight that it is, it started getting a little stressful. Why? Because without the artillery in the last phase, there's only one real way to deal damage to Zorah: getting on his head and attacking it, which is easy to do, but if you get knocked off the head, you have to wait for him to attack the gate again, then get back on the head. There were multiple times when I was close to being thrown off because that would mean more time being wasted. Though I was surprised to see that flinching Zorah stops his super breath.
Please tell me there's some way to stop that attack.
I just found it, handler! Anyway, after a bunch of attacking the head and being knocked off, I was able to beat it without touching the artillery. I did have Master Rank here though, because let's be honest, Zorah Magdaros is too boring to fight fair. As for Kulf Taroth, only the first phase has cannons to avoid. The rest of the phases don't really have artillery, so I had to deal damage in the first phase. Then in the second phase, I got it to... You know what, let's just move on. Now on to the last siege monster, the very fights that HeyJ spoke about in his journal, Fatalis in Iceborne. I was mostly nervous for this because it's hard enough without a challenge. There are cannons, ballistas, and the Dragonator that I can't use, plus dealing with the 30-minute timer as well as breaking the horns in time was not something I was looking forward to. And because I couldn't use the artillery at all here, I knew I needed a different strategy.
Make use of the ballistae and cannons.
I refuse, serious handler. Also, ballistae? At first, I was testing the waters, or flames in this case, with the fight on the first attempt. Didn't get very far. Then on the second attempt, I decided to try something different. I would equip the ghillie mantle, place the bombs, and explode them for early damage. Then go back to camp and equip the set with the other mantles, then go for the horns. On that same attempt, I was somehow able to break the horns without using anything special. I failed the quest, but breaking the horns without the artillery changed everything at that point. I just had to get as many head snipes as I could to break the head more consistently, which I did, but I still failed because you guys know how hard Fatalis is. So after a few messed up attempts, I finally got a good run where I was consistently dealing good damage to the head. Sadly though, the last phase came before the head broke, but I was able to break it just before things got out of hand. After that, the rest of the fight was just a matter of dealing Savage Axe damage and... oh. The time ran out. Other than not breaking the head before the last phase, that was the best attempt I could do. I know it's possible, but I just wasn't able to beat it without the artillery despite my best efforts. Sorry, HeyJ, I let you down. I wasn't going to include Ibushi and Narwa in this video because of how easy they are even without artillery, but I would be lying if I didn't say the Ibushi fight took longer than I expected. I know it was the event version, but come on! I couldn't reach him when he had the cannonballs surrounding him, which meant less opportunity for damage. Took me around 20 minutes despite being one of the easier elders in Rise. As for Narwa, it was the same deal, though there were times I kept messing up my counters, which made the fight admittedly more annoying than it had to be. Guess that's what I get for saying these monsters are easy. I may have failed HeyJ in this challenge against Fatalis, but he is a great content creator and I highly recommend his content. You can check out the very video where he gave his thoughts about the artillery in Monster Hunter, as well as his other content.